I recently took second at ARG Orlando this past weekend and wanted to talk a bit about what I experienced. I want to give my impressions on what I played against, what I saw community and player-wise, and what I thought of the event. I'll start with the more technical side of things and talk about my deck and matchups and then go into everything else. This is going to be a long one, so I'll leave some timestamps in the descriptions if you want to hop around a bit. I ran a variant of white, blue, green Feyre. I decided on this deck after seeing it on a list of tops from the Italian Uber series. I'll leave a link in the description to all the deck lists from that. A lot of it is your standard red-green fare, but the first and second place stand out due to being a bit outside of convention. I'm also going to leave a link to a post made by Benjamin Bargetzi, the original pilot of the deck, where he breaks down a lot about his mindset when making the deck as well as its perceived matchups. I'm going to do a bit of the same, but only within the context of what I was expecting and what I experienced. I'm not going to go into what every card does like I normally do, but I will explain some of the strategical choices behind a lot of the cards I was running. And without further ado, here's the list I ran. Most of the elf package for the deck is standard regardless of what you're running. Spirit Color Elf can easily abuse Feyre's Stone Recovery ability, and Sacred Elf is a standard 4 of in just about every wind-related deck. Melfi serves a similar ramping position like Spirit Color and Sacred, but she also doubles as a potential Ayu out since you can torrent her for damage nullification. Tia and her Falcon are often the preferred choice of what to grab when you flip over, and they're pretty strong options here too. Tama isn't an elf, but he is a staple. On top of providing draw power, he also serves as cheap token removal against the Feyre Mirror, and can kill off Fiery Fox and Problem Swiftness Resonators when combined with True Blade of Spirits. He also works well with Tia if for some reason I was unable to cast Falcon the turn she entered. This list differs from Firewind Feyre by not relying on Fiery Fox or Maria Bella to put in all the work. Instead, I ended up running Commander of the Crowd, since she synergizes well with the deck's main game-ending strategy of boosting all your elves to a ridiculous total and closing in one turn. In most of my matches, I actually opted to grab her over Tia, because the deck typically functions so well that there were never threats on board that I would need Tia and Falcon to deal with. Or what was on the board would kill Falcon before he could swing. Tama was a very popular card, and he's an instant out to Falcon. Tia is also a powerful card, but not nearly as much as Commander if I already had a field full of elves. The other one-ofs I experimented with were Ciel and Feathsing. Both of them are quick cast resonators, so I could play them at the end of my opponent's turn if they didn't do anything that warranted needing me to counter or cancel something. Feathsing also doubled as a great way to spot dodge problem spells and abilities, and she can save Commander or Tia if my opponent goes for a final battle. I rarely casted Ciel from hand, and instead would pull her with Feyre. Her ability to produce 2 kinds of will helps to cast Rendezvous, since I only have 4 sources of light in the deck. I opted to not try and split the water and light evenly because water helps more with hard field control. That, and I had Melfi to help out in most situations where I needed will fixing. The spell lineup is standard green control for the most part. I had a total of 8 counterspells, which felt just about right for the main board. I didn't want to have so many counters that I never had a chance to play anything on my own turn, but I also was expecting to see more resonator-heavy decks than spell-heavy decks. The US still seemed to be super hyped on the red-green train, so field removal options seemed better than cancel options. I opted only to run 2 Otherworld Dreams because I had a hard time thinking of what I would want to cancel with it. I really don't want to cancel anything early game since True Blade of Spirits will wipe out every single meta 1 cost resonator and can take out most 2 costs with little help from either Tama, Falcon, or a token blocking or attacking. Most people tend to commit hard on will early when playing things, so being able to disrupt early turn plays can benefit in the long run since they're probably not going to get cancelled. This is especially true against decks that run will dorks like Sacred or active removal resonators like Shade. I typically save counters for late game. Otherworlding a Maria Bella or Kitsune King can often close out games if your opponent doesn't have an adequate response. Shayla's Return also helps against most monsters or staple high-cost resonators by removing them at key times. Bouncing Kitsune King when your opponent goes for a Chimera can screw a Fox out of stone advantage, and bouncing Maria when she enters prevents your opponent from getting her resonance off, assuming you've taken care of any fiery foxes on the field. Dawn is a super strong all-purpose card, and I'm glad there's actually something this powerful outside of green, because the meta would be so much worse off if it wasn't. For a light and water, you can recover something, give it 2/2 and bury till end of turn, remove a resonator from the game that would otherwise enter from the field outside of coming from the hand, or destroy all 0-cost cards on your opponent's side of the field. This card destroys Feyre Mirrors by removing all tokens your opponent controls, and completely invalidates Fox by not giving them a Chimera and making them waste a Killing Stone and 2 onboard bodies. If you're really cheeky, you could also cast this when they play Kitsune King and prevent them from searching out the 2 little fox creatures that they can use. A Rendezvous of Light and Wind is the last surprise card in the deck. It's incredibly powerful and is what allows the deck to win. For foil, you can slap 4 1/1 counters on every J Resonator you control. This often would add up to me gaining an extra 12 to 28 damage on the field, which was enough to end the game in one go with all of Favor's boosts included. Flying Cloud only supplements this by giving Favor and one other Resonator flying for that turn, which would often be what deals the killing blow. The primary strategy of the deck is to disrupt your opponent while you build tokens and will dorks on your side of the field. True Blade of Spirits makes it very easy to keep early game Resonator plays in check, and Millennia Bond can help save your field from early final battles. Your endgame will either be playing Rendezvous for one big swing, or slowly whittling your opponent down with Tamas and tokens till you can flip Favor over and boost something for game. Bargetzi calls the deck mid-range, but I felt I was playing harder to the control game. Most of my plays were reactive to what my opponent was doing, and I often left a lot of will open during their turn. There are obviously some situations where I would just go in early, but rarely did I find myself flipping Favor and swinging for game on turn 3. Oftentimes if I flipped Favor, it was just to protect my field, and I would use him to continue calling stones every turn while my army of 1/1 and 2/2 Resonators slowly drained my opponent's life. I found that the deck really doesn't have any bad matchups if you know what to expect. If you just slap things on the field and don't know what your opponent is going to do, then you'll probably suffer for it. This deck lived and died by my own personal matchup knowledge, and a huge reason behind my one loss at Orlando came from me not being fully prepared or understanding a specific matchup. The same could be said for any match where I felt uneasy about my plays. It was less the deck and more of me needing to break bad habits and play around the situation at hand. Alright, let's dig into the match report. I went 5-0-1 in Swiss after intentionally drawing in the final round. We played the match for fun anyways, and I would have ended up 6-0-0. I took 2 rounds in top 8 and then ended up losing to Ayu from a mix of bad draws, my opponent playing intelligently and safely, and me not being completely familiar with the matchup. Round 1 was against a white-red-blue Millium 2. I wasn't too worried going into the match since I knew Millium would need way more turns to stack up dragon counters than I would be willing to give him. I wasn't worried about control spells since I didn't see green in his stone base, and just ended up playing wide. His Resonators didn't stay on the field for very long, if they even made it out in the first place. True Blade was the MVP here, and destroyed plenty of Kid Puss in Boots, Tiny Alabaster Drakes, and Alabaster Dragon Knights. I mostly ended up just flipping Favor after having built up a field and swung in for game. There really isn't much Millium 2 can do against hard aggression, and he needs to play a hard control game, which unfortunately are options that white, red, and blue don't give you. Round 2 was against white, red, green Keurig midrange. This was one of the more interesting lists I played against that day, and it turned out that I was his only loss in Swiss. It was piloted by Stephen Wells, who ended up taking 6 overall. I'll leave a link to the original deck list as well as an updated one he made following the ARG in the description. The games here were probably some of the hardest, because Keurig is one of the few J-rulers that can put out considerable damage with very little investment. I was hesitant to spend will since I knew Maria Bella would probably pop up after seeing a few Blasting Waves come from his stone deck, so I sat on my Shayla's returns as needed. I ended up having to invest a lot of resources early game to keep his board clear with Trueblade, Tama, and token blockers. Freyla, Sylvia, and Redcap would put in a lot of work otherwise if I didn't. My goal was always to flip Favor before he could flip Keurig, so I could try to save my board before it ate a nasty 2.5k in damage. Rendezvous, Favor Pump, and Commander proved to be too overwhelming for Keurig to keep up with, and I was able to clutch it out in round 2. I ended up having to use a lot of cancel spells on Food Supply to stop him from restocking on enough counters to cast Hellflame. He was much more conservative with his counters in Game 2, but unfortunately wasn't able to get the Hellflame to wipe me, nor was he able to get to the Lumia's Judgment that would have destroyed my whole board otherwise. Overall, I think Keurig is very scary, and can do some crazy stuff in mid-range. He'll probably see a similar power spike as Gil received whenever his Wingdings are translated, and I can't wait to see what support he gets then too. Round 3 was against Dark Elves, and I wasn't too scared of this one because I knew I could play around most of the deck. Dark Elves live to take damage so they can abuse cards like Hilda, Safina, and Dark Red, so all I had to do was avoid letting him drop below the 2000 life trigger points for those cards until I could drop him in one go. Game 1 ended up being pretty one-sided with Sacred Elf and Spirit Caller letting me build my field and simultaneously kill off his. In Game 2 he swapped over to Lunia, so I was a little bit more scared. I didn't side in my other Dawn of the Earth or even Foresights because I wasn't too worried about not having blockers. I stuck to my guns though, and pumped out Spirit Callers to recover stones and True Blade things before they could attack. Favor Flip for game ended up being the power play this time. I really didn't want to sit back and wait for Lunia to flip over and come in before I could stop her. Round 4 was the first of 2 back-to-back Ayu matches. I had some semblance of how this deck works from playtesting against the 2 other people who ended up taking Ayu to Orlando. This is a difficult but manageable matchup for Control Farer. Your job isn't to kill her before she kills you, but instead to make her waste resources early on. This means stopping her damage, which I was able to do thanks to the Pseudo-Torn effect on Melfi and Amanarasu's Foresight. Once Ayu is out of gas, it's very easy to close the match out since she won't be able to swing for much. Game 1 is always the most difficult against Ayu since most of my cards do nothing to her. I built the deck for Resonator-reliant decks, and Ayu doesn't care about Trueblade, Return, or the field full of tokens and low-stat elves I had swinging at her. Stall plays, Favor flips with Cloud, and Melfi ended up winning me this round. Round 5 was another Ayu, specifically Stuart McGirt's Ayu deck that ended up winning the whole event, and the one player who was actually ready to fight against my own deck. This is one of the few rounds where we ended up going to Game 3. Game 1 was pretty much a blowout. He had the God Hand, my foresights were in the side, and I was unable to torrent Melfi. Games 2 and 3 I tried to play a bit faster and flip before he could, which is damn near impossible against Ayu. He flipped and then played casually. He knew I wouldn't overcommit on Will without leaving up enough for foresight and a counterspell to potentially stop him from nulling my damage negation. At one point I remembered having to ram Favor into him to try and set him back a turn, and then bait the Flame Horse Search. I ended up clutching the match by grabbing Commander and simply overpowering him. Ayu alone cannot stop 7 Resonators and a J-Ruler from swinging in, and I was willing to sacrifice someone to make sure the rest of my damage got through. All 3 matches were very nerve-wracking. Your life is never safe against Ayu. I was pretty much either at full or dead, and one misstep on my part could have spelled out a loss. Round 6 was against the 4th place finisher, Tyler Wilson, and his Fox deck. Tyler also ended up taking GP Atlanta last year, as well as a few other Georgia tournaments, so I was ready to have to keep my focus up for this one. We decided to intentionally draw the round. Thanks, Force of Will Co. I'm not against this rule, but I am confused as to why you have it. We still played the match out though, as we both wanted to experience against the other's deck. Fox feels like a 60-40 against Control Farer. Fox has to play a lot more carefully now that Griffin is gone. Simply flipping on one Killing Stone can go very badly if Kitsune King isn't right behind him. Shayla's return really helps shift the matchup in Favor's favor, since you can bait a Chimera summon and return King before it resolves. You can Trueblade Shade, Elf, and most of the other Resonators Fox will try to use for fodder and keep his field clear. Between Trueblades, Dawns, and Amonsul on my side, the matchup for Fox becomes an uphill battle if he doesn't hit 2 Killing Stones early. The top 8 cut was exceptionally stressful. I had made it all the way into first seed without seeing a single Yggdrasil, which was the matchup I had resigned to losing, only to find out that it was what I was going to be playing against first. I'm not sure if I can actually put into words how awful it feels fighting Tree. It's like a ticking time bomb of whether or not you're going to see an Arla, Melgus, or Rizard hit the field. I painfully had to learn to stop autopiloting in this match, since I could not give barrier to things while swinging while Arla was out. I feel like Control Favor can handle Yig pretty well, but I was lacking in experience against it, and it almost ended up costing me the whole tournament. I took Game 1 after decking him out from having a decent board recovery after a large final battle. He took Game 2 after setting up a board of Arlas, and I had run out of steam. I ended up clutching Game 3 in time when he overcommitted on a final battle that I was able to cancel. I just played out the remaining 4 minutes of the match in stall mode and set up walls or removing his Resonators. After turns in top 8, the win goes to whoever has the highest life. There was no point in trying to deck him out at that point since I had a 3k lead on him. Tree is a goofy matchup, and I learned a lot by playing against someone with knowledge of that deck. My top 4 opponent was the same Fox from round 6. I was pretty confident in my ability to beat the deck since I already knew how it worked. I knew Fox wouldn't flip without at least 1 Killing Stone and a Kitsune King on board. I misplayed the first Kitsune King and bounced him when his enter went off rather than waiting for the Chimera summon. King was bounced, Manticore came out, but thankfully there wasn't anything too important in my hand to be discarded. That was what I pulled away from this game the most, that my deck had so many options that discarding one thing didn't really hinder my strategy. I want to say he discarded Tia, but it didn't matter too much since I flipped the next turn and grabbed Commander. After that, it didn't matter what Chimera he went for, because my field was already stacked with Commander and Favor on board, and I was able to close out very quickly. Game 2 took a bit longer than first, but mostly because I didn't want to overcommit until after my opponent did. I had 2 Dawns and a Millennia Bond in hand, so I just sat on them while I drew into my Will ramp and board control cards. He finally committed on grabbing a Chimera after I bounced Kitsune King twice, only for me to end up dawning it and getting the surrender. Dawn is a death knell for Fox decks, and for a very long time there wasn't really any deck that's been able to abuse it. Grand Finals was another repeat match from Swiss. This time it was Ayu. As I said before, Stuart and I played at the same locals and had played against each other even before our first round at Swiss. The match started as a repeat of round 5. I didn't have any foresights in main, so Ayu very quickly beat my face in. I was kind of expecting it. I had never beat any Ayu in the first game ever, and it was always game 2 and 3 when I had all my answers in, and I was able to push the match in my favor. Game 2 was sadly also a complete blowout. I cited in all my foresights, but chose not to hard mull for them when I should have. Being able to stockpile will resources against Ayu doesn't really mean anything if you can't handle her damage, and I ended up getting my face ripped apart because of it. Another thing I learned is never let IU go second if you have the chance. I lucked out in Swiss, but giving Stuart Energize in finals half contributes to why I lost, since he only needs that one free will to judgment and instantly starts applying pressure to me, if not just outright kill me. I never saw a single Foresight or Melfi, and that match was over pretty quickly. Overall, I'm pretty content with how my deck functioned. This is the first time in my 2 to 3 years of playing the game that I actually placed in a top cut from a 40-plus tournament. I'm a little sad I didn't make first since I'll already be in Japan when the World stuff rolls around in fall of next year, so the unpaid half of the invite wouldn't matter to me. There will always be other chances to nab one though, and I'm glad we had a lot of new names in a forcible top 8. The event was fun, and I met a lot of friendly and creative players from the Florida region. My only complaint at the event was that there was never an announcement for the top 8 to come submit for deck checks. It was something every other game, including the 14-man Final Fantasy tournament, had. Stuart and I almost ended up with Game 1 losses because of it, something the ARG head enjoyed continually telling us. I'm confident in my build. There's nothing in the main I'd really want to change out. I would rather alter the side a bit, though. I never used Arrow Trap. Trueblade was able to put in enough work to deal with aggro along with Tama and a few off tokens. I think instead I'd want to run 2 Eternal Towers, since that would slow down Ayu a considerable amount, and she ended up being one of the more difficult decks to play around. I think I'd also trade out Great Tornado for a third Otherworld, but then again I never found myself against Zero, who Great Tornado was meant for in the first place. I'll include my own updated list in the description if anyone wants to try that out over my ARG list. I'm sure some people will be very quick to dismiss ARG Orlando because of how wide the range of rulers were, but I feel that everyone who made the top 8 earned it, regardless if they fit your narrative for an unhealthy meta or not. Green is undoubtedly a strong color right now, and every single top 8 deck either had it as its main, secondary, or tertiary option. I do think Green Gil is super strong and will probably start placing at later events since he can straight tutor spells from his deck when he needs them on his J-Ruler side. You thought having to double guess on favor boosting out Final Battle Range was bad? How about a guy who can search out a 6-cost 20/20 boost and play it for 4? Hell, even a 6/6 boost is completely free for him if he needs it. Kirik is another ruler I think we'll see on the rise, especially after he has his Wingdings abilities revealed. He's one of the few rulers that has a strong and cheap response to AU, and can even catch her off guard if the person piloting AU is bad with the deck. True Blade of Spirits was a disgustingly underrepresented card at Orlando, and I actually can't believe so many people were sleeping on it. This thing is wall of win levels of dumb, and can completely invalidate turn 1 plays. Having Energize on a green ruler ensures that you'll screw something up for your opponent. This means that Feyre, Fox, Yggdrasil, and both guilds will have an edge against Resonator-reliant decks. I'd list Fari in there, but I think she loses to IU in the J-Ruler Beatstick gimmick. There's so much more I want to talk about concerning the game, its popularity, and Forza Wilco's PR with their players, but this script has already hit the 4K word mark, so I'll put all of that in a later video. I do have 2 other archetype videos coming along that I originally wanted to have done before Orlando, but I had to get an alien pulled out of my chest and spent about 2 weeks recovering from surgery right before the tournament. If you sat through this whole thing, I really appreciate it, and if you happen to be one of the players I face in Orlando or know one of them, please let me know so I can put your name in the description on what you played. I'm terrible with names and even more terrible at reading handwriting sometimes. Alright, well, peace out, and I hope to see some of you guys at GP and ARG events in the coming future.